Hey everybody, it's Andy from Sound of Muzak. It has been a while, except if you've been tuning in to my shorts throughout this week, which I want to thank those of you that have checked out those videos. It's been a lot of fun getting back into the swing of things, and hopefully we continue that momentum. I think it's been a couple of years now since I did my last top 10 video, which, by the way, this is through my Journey in Muzak series, where I go through each year in musical history, where I've been discussing my top 10 favorite records. I initially started this series, I believe, we're coming 4, maybe even 5 years, where I started with the year 1965, and of course I have top 10s as well, discussing my favorite records released in 1966, 1967, as well as 1968. A big reason why there has been gaps in between those videos, as long as what may be the longest gap to date, is I find when I do these specific type of videos that I'm very intricate with my research and the things I want to discuss, as well as I do really spend time listening to these records, re-listening to these records. When I initially started this series, really the intention was to just discover new music, or really just an excuse to discover new music, right? I just want to give a shout out to my co-host Rob that has been sort of maintaining this channel over the past couple of years. And I also want to thank all of you that have stuck around these past several years. I can't believe that this channel is coming across 7 years now this summer. Where does time even go? So let's just jump right into it. 1969, the final year of the 1960s. Summer of Love ended 2 years ago. And if 1968, the year prior, was anything to go by, we were seeing a lot of rock bands specifically really going back to roots-style music. That very much continues into 1969, but we're also seeing a lot of artists, whether that may be in rock or jazz specifically, really kind of setting what would become the 1970s, which many, myself included, would agree is probably the most exciting decade of music, where there was just change after change, progression after progression, and it starts with this year. I do want to give just one honorable mention before we get into the top 10, as I can't believe I forgot to include this record in my initial shorts, and that's the Argentine psychedelic rock band Almendra. This is a record, specifically the guitar player, Luis Alberto Spinetta, who I've been just going down this rabbit hole recently with his 12 million bands that he was in throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I think even well into the 90s as well. Such an incredible guitar player that blows cats like Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page out of the water big time. And every record that he is a part of very much is reflective of the type of music that was occurring, with this record specifically being a incredible psychedelic rock album in the vein of like Cream meets the Beatles. Kicking things off at number 10, we have Our Mother Mountain by Townes Van Zandt, which this is his second record. This is an album that lives on the intersection of folk meets country meets blues, but what really makes it special is how it just defines its simplicity with all of those genres intersecting. It's mostly just Townes, his voice, and his stripped-back acoustic guitar, with very little orchestral overdubs placed where necessary. Lyrically, all of these songs are poetic, deeply reflective, touching on love, loneliness, and longing. His delivery with these tunes are calm, almost fragile, but that's what gives this record its weight. If you're new to Townes Van Zandt, I do believe that this record is a great place to start, and my favorite tracks off this record are songs such as Kathleen, Snake Mountain Blues, and my personal favorite, Like a Summer Thursday. At number 9, we have Hot Rats by Frank Zappa. This is his first solo release record, where he actually released 2 albums this year. I had somewhere in my list of favorite releases, if you caught any of the videos from earlier this week. But this record completely changed how I heard music. It's mostly an instrumental record, with the only vocal being opening track Willie the Pimp, to feature none other than Captain Beefheart, whose Trout Mask replica also came out this year, which was on my list of favorite records, and was also produced by Frank Zappa. With this record, Zappa brilliantly blends rock, jazz, and classical ideas into something that really helped define jazz fusion. Songs such as Peaches and Regalia, which is probably one of the standout tunes that maybe most would know off this record, is so brilliant as it's a very complex composition, yet it somehow maintains to be catchy. And from a production standpoint, this record was way ahead of its time, as it was one of the first records to use 16-track recording. Zappa isn't just playing, he is composing on this record, and this is really the first album of his to really showcase that. My favorite tracks off this record are, again, Willie the Pimp and Peaches and Regalia, but I'm also a huge fan of the epic gumbo variations. At number 8, I have The Gilded Palace of Sin by the Flying Burrito Brothers. This is a record that is very much one of the earlier foundations of country rock. Co-founders Chris Hillman, formerly from the Byrds, as well as Graham Parsons, who was on the last Byrds record, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. That record also very much laid the groundwork of country rock music. What makes this record really unique and stand out is the key sound here, with pedal steel guitarist Sneaky Pete, whose pedal steel playing gives this lush, almost psychedelic feel to it. Lyrically, this record leans into love, loss, and regret, a theme that you're going to see throughout some of these records on this list. And at the center of it all was Graham Parsons' vision of cosmic American music. This idea blended country, rock, psychedelia, gospel, and folk music, all into one cohesive sound, which you can very much hear off of this record. This is one of those records where side one is just borderline perfect, from the opening tune, Christine's tune, to Sin City, to the beautiful rendition of Aretha Franklin's Do Right Woman, which I believe has David Crosby and Graham Nash on backing vocals. And of course, the iconic country standard Dark End of the Street, which may very well be my favorite track off of this record, along with side two's Hot Burrito 1 and 2. If you haven't heard this record, it is a must record to check out. If you're also someone that's apprehensive towards country music, this is also a great country record to check out. At number 7, we have Via da Kilimanjaro by Miles Davis. This is very much a transitional record in Miles' career. We still have our second great quintet lineup featured on this record, with, of course, Wayne Shorter on tenor sax, Herbie Hancock on piano, Ron Carter on bass, as well as Tony Williams on drums. However, in addition, we have subsequent Miles collaborators such as Chick Corea on electric piano, Dave Holland on bass, and Jack DiGiannante on drums. This record is still very much layered in post-bop. However, we're starting to hear Miles transition to what would become jazz fusion that, of course, he would elaborate and expand those sounds on with electric instrumentation. Side 2 is where we really start to hear some of those more fusion-y sounds with Chick Corea's electric piano and just a more experimental sound in the production by, of course, Tio Macaro overall. And to add on to the electric influence, the closing track sounds like it could have been influenced by Jimi Hendrix. And really that's what makes this record so special to me, is that it's bridging between these eras. Miles even once said himself that he reinvented jazz music 5 or 6 times, and we're starting to hear that with this record. But what I also love about this record is, despite its length being just under an hour, this is a very easy and relaxing record to listen to, sort of like another record of his that may appear on this list. My favorite tracks off this record are Tutti Sweet, which I might have butchered the pronunciation, as well as the title track. Now would be a good time to mention, as I failed to mention it before in the video, all of these records for me are 10 out of 10s, with the exception of the Townes Van Zandt record, which we already discussed, with that album being a 9 out of 10. Okay, continuing at number 6, we have 5 Leaves Left by Nick Drake, which this is his debut album. This is a very quiet, intimate, and emotionally heavy album. It's built on his delicate guitar work, soft vocals, and just beautiful, lush string arrangements. Used right, might I add. Tragically, this record did not get really any attention whatsoever when it came out, but over time, this became a cult classic. And this is sort of the tragedy with Nick Drake, as he only released 2 other albums after this one, and that would be his fate for his untimely overdose in 1973. 4. But this record has some of Drake's most celebrated songs, such as Riverman, which might be his most iconic song besides Pink Moon. This track is known for its unusual time signature and haunting orchestral arrangement. Tracks such as Way to Blue surrounds Drake's vocals with beautifully melancholic strings. And then there's the track Fruit Tree, which reflects on fame, obscurity, and how artists are often recognized only after they are gone. A little bit of irony and foreshadowing there. I also love the opening track, Time Has Told Me, which very much sets the tone of the record. But honestly, with Gilded Palace of Sin, where I talked about that record, side 1 being perfect, I believe this record, side 2, is perfect. I love tracks such as Cello Song, and I love the stripped down Saturday Sun, which is, of course, the closer off of this record. This is a record that, to me, just sounds completely timeless. And if you are a fan of folk rock, but if you're also a fan of some of the more 2000s, 2010s indie folk music, this is a record that you have to check out. At number 5, we have Abbey Road by the Beatles. Some might get a little worked up with the placement of this record on my list, but again, this is my list. These are my favorites, and the Beatles are my favorite band, so it's inevitable that their albums are going to make just about any top 10 on my lists, as my previous videos would indicate. This is a 10 out of 10 record, and like every Beatles record from Rubber Soul on, it has a special place in my heart. In many ways, probably the most important out of any Beatles record, even if it's not my number 1 favorite these days. This is their final recorded album, as Let It Be was released after, but of course was recorded before this, and really what a send-off. What's so great about this record is how polished, cohesive, and the songwriting is top-notch, even with George Harrison's 2 contributions, Here Comes the Sun and Something. And speaking of Something, it really is his best song. It's my favorite song off the record. It's probably my 3rd favorite song of all time. This is a song that's also very important to my wife and I, as well as the rest of this record. I actually sung this song to my wife on the day of our wedding, and although we're not going to get into how horrible it was a very meaningful and important moment in our relationship, as again, this song laid the groundwork in our relationship. Thinking about all of those countless times listening to Abbey Road from start to finish, various road trips. And it's just one of those songs that I most associate with her, along with the Beach Boys' God Only Knows. And speaking of songs that we would always sing along together, how about a song like Because, with the brilliant 3-part harmony with John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison? Just from a production standpoint alone, with all of the vocal layers, brilliant and just groundbreaking. Also a very difficult song to harmonize too, fun fact. But also one of my favorite songs, I Want You, She's So Heavy. Such a dark and intense song. That build up with the last 3 minutes or so, with the guitar increasing and just more overdubbed layers, and then it just cuts off into Here Comes the Sun. Just a iconic moment on the record. And then of course there's the side 2 medley, the Abbey Road medley, which I love, don't get me wrong. I find these days Beatles fans do tend to overrate the Abbey Road medley, but it very much laid the groundwork for a lot of interesting and intricate 70s production styles, and you could even say played a role in the foundation of progressive rock, maybe? But what makes this record also special is, with hindsight, this was the breakup of the Beatles. Tensions were rising and were at an all-time high, yet they were able to be unified and went out on a bang. If there's really anything I could criticize about Abbey Road, it's that, like Let It Be, in my opinion, despite the fact that they went out on a bang, they do sound a little tired off this record. I think for me personally, I've also burned myself on this record just a wee bit. But again, I want to reiterate, it's a Beatles record. They're my favorite band. It's on this list, and it's still a favorite record of all time for me. At number 4, we have the self-titled Townes Van Zandt album by, of course, Townes Van Zandt. So this is our second Townes record on this list. Like Our Mother Mountain, this record's strengths are very much the stripped down nature, both with the songwriting, the vocal performance, and Townes' acoustic guitar, which gives this massive emotional weight to these songs. Musically, this record blends folk, country, and blues, and this blend of those three sounds very much laid the groundwork for Americana music, and one would say that this is a very important record in that genre. One of the most famous tunes off this record, Waiting Around to Die, is this haunting narrative that tells a bleak story about hardship, addiction, and loneliness. Another standout track is Colorado Girl, and this is a more softer, more reflective piece that showcases Van Zandt's ability to write songs that feel both deeply personal and universally relatable. I also love the track Lungs, which is a mysterious and poetic track that captures the introspective spirit running throughout this album. But I think what would be my favorite song off this record would be Fare Thee Well, Miss Carousel. This is a melancholic, introspective, folk country ballad, which the narrator addresses a figure named Miss Carousel, expressing resignation and farewell. The song's vivid, often surreal imagery with ordinary details convey loss, regret, and acceptance, being told from the first-person point of view. Despite this track being very weary, it also very much displays dark humor throughout with stark, pure honesty. Like Our Mother Mountain, the production off this record just remains sparse and relies even less on elaborate arrangements than Our Mother Mountain did, focusing again on just Townes. And Townes' songs are at their best when it's just Townes, his voice, and his guitar. Bottom line, this record doesn't try to impress you, it just tells the truth. Some of my favorite additional tracks, besides the ones I mentioned already, would also be the song Columbine. But really, this is just a perfect record, both side 1 and side 2, and it's one that's worth listening to from start to finish. Check it out if you haven't already. At number 3, we have Karma by Pharoah Sanders. This isn't just an album or a record, this is a journey. This record was pivotal in my journey through jazz, as this is one of the first jazz records that I ever came across. I think what really drew my attention to this record is that this is very much in the vein of John Coltrane. One might even say that Pharoah Sanders was the spiritual successor to Train, as Sanders would play with Train for about the last 2 years of his life or so. Karma was released at the height of the spiritual jazz movement, which again, the groundwork there was very much laid by John Coltrane as well as Alice Coltrane, and this is a record that very much defined that sound. Karma blends free jazz improvisation as well as spiritual themes and global musical influences. The result is a record that doesn't necessarily feel less like a typical jazz record, but more like this deeply meditative journey. And a lot of that has to not only do with Sanders, but with vocalist Leon Thomas, whose distinctive form of yodeling, as well as his blend of traditional African vocal chanting, both blend and create this stark contrast with Sanders' saxophone throughout. At nearly 33 minutes, the track The Creator Has a Master Plan, which on initial vinyl issues was all on side 1, but on subsequent reissues, split into both sides of vinyl, is this expansive but also provocative spiritual journey that just has its ups and downs, but keeps you focused, interested, and maintaining that meditative quality throughout. And after the 33-minute behemoth that is The Creator Has a Master Plan, the record then ends with the 5.5 minutes or so track Colors. Colors is this much more restrained, emotional track, which very much has this end credits feel to it. Again, featuring Leon Thomas's vocals, with Sanders' saxophone playing being much more restrained. I think this is such a beautiful way to close this record, with Leon Thomas beautifully singing about Mother Nature and all of its various colors. I remember when I first heard this song many years ago, I just remember my jaw hitting the ground, as again, the stark contrast between Colors and The Creator Has a Master Plan being such polar opposite songs, yet somehow they're meant to be heard together. This record just has the two aforementioned tracks, so of course, both being my favorite. If you are a fan of avant-garde jazz, free jazz, or again, spiritual jazz, and you have not heard this record, you owe yourself to check this one out. I also think if you're someone that's into some of the more psychedelic experimental rock that's going on around this time period, you will also be a fan of this record. Okay, this is where things really start to get personal with my number 2 and my number 1 picks. And our number 2 is In a Silent Way by Miles Davis. If you've been following this channel for a long time now, you may recall that Rob and I did a video years ago talking about our top 5 favorite albums. And in that video, I talked about this record as well as my number 1. And admittedly, the order of these two do tend to change, but for today, we're going with In a Silent Way as number 2. And what's there to say? I mean, this album changed everything, both in terms of the musical landscape at the time, but also for me personally when I first discovered this record. For many, Kind of Blue is overall the introductory jazz album, and for me, that was no exception. However, when I came across it In a Silent Way, and this could also be due to my love of rock music of this time, but this record just hit me in a completely different way. This idea that jazz and rock could coexist just blew my mind at the time. We already discussed how Via to Kilimanjaro was very much a transitional record into jazz fusion, and this is where Miles was in full swing, as this record entirely features electric instrumentation, also adding in guitars with guitar player John McLaughlin, who would go on to form the Mahavishnu Orchestra in the 70s. And this record consists of 2 long pieces, both on side 1 and side 2. With side 1 starting out with shh/peaceful, it sets the tone for what will be this atmospheric, meditative composition that just slowly unfolds into this subtle improvisation, but brilliant shifting textures throughout, which for jazz specifically was very unusual at the time, and Miles very much received a lot of criticism from jazz purists and his contemporaries. The second piece, side 2, is the track In a Silent Way / It's About That Time, and this very much continues the journey that side 1 introduced, with gradual building, but this energy that maintains throughout, creating a dreamy, hypnotic mood. Instead of spotlighting one soloist at a time, the musicians interact more like a collective, creating a seamless musical landscape rather than a traditional jazz performance. We also have to mention Tio Macaro's role with this record, as what George Martin was for the Beatles was very much what Tio Macaro was to Miles Davis. It's Tio's brilliant editing that really make these compositions stand out, as Miles and the band here would just jam and improvise for hours upon hours upon hours. And it was Tio's meticulous editing that really took the best of those improvised sessions, making it into what would become this record. I have to recommend that if you are into this record as much as I am, you have to check out the complete In a Silent Way sessions, where you very much hear a lot of those improvised pieces that I just alluded to, and are worth seeking out if you like this sound. This is one of those records where I first got into roughly 15 years ago that still holds a lot of meaning and personal attachment. It's a record that I still listen to a lot to this day. I would say minimum it's on my turntable once a month. And it's one of those records where when I need to clear my head or I just need to calm down and relax, it's a go-to. And what I also love about this record is after all these years of listening to it over and over and over again, is that I'm still hearing new things to this day. And I think that's what makes a record like this so special, is not only the personal meaning that it has for me, but that I'm just still making new discoveries for the first time. I think if you're someone that has reservations when it comes to jazz, but you appreciate some of the more psychedelic sides of rock music, or if you're someone that appreciates ambient early electronic music, this is a record that is well worth checking out. At number 1, and I may have given it away, if you can see my shirt here, The Velvet Underground by The Velvet Underground. And this is their 3rd self-titled album. And such a stark contrast from the Velvet Underground and Nico, as well as their second record, White Light, White Heat. This is a more intimate, stripped down version of the band, as I believe prior to recording this record, they had a good majority of their equipment and gear stolen. So part of this record was written and recorded just out of sheer necessity. And although the Velvets were known for their abrasive sound, I adore this much more softer sound, but the emotional depth from the first two records is still very much present. Bassist and violist John Cale left after White Light, White Heat and was replaced by Doug Yule. And I really do appreciate Yule's contributions throughout this record. And a lot of that was Lou Reed kind of taking it a step back and not only allowing himself to be more vulnerable, but allowed for collaboration, specifically utilizing Yule's voice with some of the most delicate, intimate songs on this record. We open up with the first track, Candy Says, which explores identity and vulnerability and is about a transgender woman, Candy Darling. And I have to point out that this is 1969, and these were issues that were discussed and talked about. This song tells the story of a trans woman who is trying to reflect their own identity, but while at the same time reflect on their own insecurities and just their desire to be accepted. But what I think makes this song so brilliant is how relatable it is. Yes, this song has a literal story. It's about a specific individual, but you cannot tell me that this is something that we can all relate to. When I look into the mirror, what do you think I see if I can come away from here? I mean, I know as someone who's also insecure and was certainly an insecure teenager, I would look at myself in the mirror and feel completely insecure. So while not downplaying the meaning of this song, again, what makes it so brilliant is that it's literal, but it's universal at the same time. Another standout track is track 2, What Goes On, and is our first song to feature Lou Reed back on vocals. I love the upbeat nature of this song, and I love how organ-driven it is throughout, but also juxtaposed with that hypnotic guitar from Reed and Sterling Morrison, with a steady groove throughout. When the Velvets would play this song live, this would be a jam that would go on for 6, 8, sometimes even 10 plus minutes. This record also features the band's most emotionally resonant songs, along with Candy Says, of course, that being Pale Blue Eyes, which is my favorite song off the record, as well as After Hours, sung by drummer Mo Tucker. Pale Blue Eyes is this quiet, deep, personal reflection on love and regret, as the narrator of the story, still in love with the woman who's about to be married to another man, yet has these, which could be at times selfish feelings for her, but also, again, reinstating that feeling of loss and regret. This is such a beautiful song, and again, is probably a top 10 favorite song of mine of all time. Whereas After Hours is this gentle, almost childlike song, and you hear that in Mo Tucker's voice. Initially, Lou was supposed to sing lead vocals on this track, but he felt that Mo Tucker, who has had no prior experience of singing, would be able to convey that childlike feeling, and boy does she pull it off. Other tracks that I love on this record are Jesus, the gospel tinge, I've Been Set Free, and the rocker, I've Been Beginning to See the Light. I love the last 30 seconds of that song with the vocal harmonies between Tucker, Reed, Yule, and Sterling Moore. And this wouldn't be a Velvet Underground record if we didn't have some sort of avant-garde tinge song, and that, of course, is The Murder Mystery. And although I love this song, it does tend to take you out of place. It is very much an outlier on this record and can kind of take you away from the mood a little bit. Still such a fun track that very much takes advantage of stereo recording at the time. I just wish that other songs, such as the outtake Ocean, made its place on this record instead, as that song specifically would have fit much better off this record. But like when I say this record means so much to me, I wouldn't even have time to begin getting into why that is. This was just a record that I discovered in my formative years, in my early 20s, where I was shifting more away from hard rock, progressive rock, and heavy metal music, and was getting into more alternative indie type of rock music. And when I was discovering bands like REM and Nirvana at the time, and like even later bands like Pavement, Joy Division, Velvet Underground would always be a band that would come up. But there's just something about the vulnerability, a word I've used a lot throughout this video, that just draws me to this record every single time. I am such a massive fan of this album that you see I have my stereo vinyl copy, but I also have a 1972 pressing that is a mono edition, as well as the 45th CD anniversary box set. And I have at least 2 more CD copies of it as well. So when I say I'm a fan of this record, I can't emphasize that enough. Is this the most musical album of this year? No. Is this the most adventurous album of this year? No. But what makes this record stand out above the rest of the albums on my list, as well as just some of my other favorite albums of all time, are the songs. These are not only the best songs that Lou Reed wrote, in my opinion, but these songs are meant to be heard together. The strengths of these songs lie in the simplicity, lie in the vulnerability. This record is a record I will never be tired of hearing. And it is one of those records, while it may not be on my turntable once a month, like In a Silent Way tends to be, this is a record that I go to when I need to, whether it's to treat myself to it or when I'm just in a specific state of mind and I just need to hear it. It is medicine. I cannot express enough as to how much this album means to me. It's so vital in my musical growth. It will always be a favorite of mine, and it is my favorite album released in 1969. I hope you guys really enjoyed this top 10. I'm going to do my best to continue doing these types of lists as consistently as possible. And I think part of what's going to help with that momentum and motivation is, instead of just moving on to 1970, I'm going to jump around. I'm going to just jump around and discuss other years that I'm really fond of. And I think that that's going to really motivate me to put out more content in general. So what I will do at the end of these videos is I will announce the next year's top 10 that I will hopefully try to have out within a month or so. And so that year's going to be 1977. So we're jumping 8 years ahead in time, and you're going to have to stay tuned to see as to why I picked that year. But for now, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in with the shorts this week, and we'll see you soon. Peace.